Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored, live from my home, because I've currently got COVID. Professor Ferguson, I'll talk to you about two very polarising figures. One who sadly died in the last few days, Henry Kissinger, who you've been a biographer of, who I don't think I've ever seen anyone who got such extraordinarily different obituaries depending on what media you were looking at or reading at the time. He was either a despotic monster and warmonger, or he was one of the pivotal and great figures of modern times. I know that you sit more in the latter, but do you understand why he, even in death, incited such an extraordinary range of opinions?
Yes, I think I do understand that, Piers. I've spent a good chunk of the last 20 years working on Henry Kissinger's life. I'm in the midst of a second volume of his life as we speak. And one of the striking features of that extraordinary 100-year life was how polarizing Henry Kissinger was. From a very early stage, he had critics on both the right and the left. Over time, the left became somehow more and more vituperative, especially after the end of the Cold War. And an old friend of mine, Christopher Hitchens, did a great deal of damage in this regard with a rather hastily written book called The Trial of Henry Kissinger, in which he made the claim on the basis of almost no evidence that somehow Henry Kissinger was a war criminal. Well, that really caught on. And for a generation who really didn't know a great deal about the Cold War, it became convenient to say that about Henry Kissinger. Now, in reality, that really doesn't make any sense at all, because the kinds of things of which Henry Kissinger's accused, using bombing against civilians in Cambodia, for example, or supporting right-wing governments in Chile, are the things that secretaries of state have done pretty much throughout the period since 1945. So to put it really crudely, they're either all war criminals or, as seems more likely, none of them is. This is a really important point to make. But the second point I'd make is that if Henry Kissinger had not been Jewish, I do not think the vituperation would have been anything like as serious. There's no question in my mind that part of what motivates people to hate Kissinger is conscious or unconscious anti-Semitism. And it's been very obvious since his death that people have been prepared to say absolutely shameful things about him, literally within days of his death. And I don't think that you find that kind of thing without there being some element of anti-Semitism. And that, I think, is the harsh reality.
I mean, of course, the irony is that the second person I want to talk to you about, Donald Trump, is somebody who almost certainly when he dies, and he's not Jewish, will get almost exactly the same kind of polarized coverage of his death. But let me ask you, instead of that, about the prospect of him potentially winning in 2024. You've got to say, looking at the Republican polls for nominee, and then looking at the matchup polls between Trump and Biden, if indeed Biden is the Democrat nominee, and I know that you share my view, I think that he should stand aside. But if it is Biden-Trump, Trump has a very good chance of winning, doesn't he?
At this point, if it goes all the way to a rerun of 2020 and it's Donald Trump and Joe Biden on the ballot, then I think Donald Trump has a better than 50% chance of winning, especially if, as seems clear, the U.S. economy is going to slow down in the coming year, if not go into recession. Trump is polling strongly in the swing states that are really going to be decisive, as they always are, in the close elections that we have these days. But American politics is an unpredictable game, partly because the stakes are so high. And I don't rule out an upset on one or possibly both sides. Don't rule out Nikki Haley as a contender for the Republican nomination. There are plenty of Republicans in those key early states, Iowa and New Hampshire, who have some doubts about whether they really want Donald Trump all over again, whether they're ready for another 4 years of fire and fury. And then on the Democratic side, there's really widespread concern that Joe Biden is over the hill and should not be the candidate. They just can't work out quite how to get him to step aside the way, say, Lyndon Johnson did in '68, when it was clear that he was going to struggle to win, not because of age, but because of Vietnam. So I'm not ready to say this is a two-horse race and Trump is going to get re-elected. I think it's much too early to make that kind of confident judgment. There are surprises ahead. But at the moment, the base case is that it's Trump-Biden. And if it is Trump-Biden, then I think Trump has to be the favorite.
Yeah, I completely agree. Professor, I've got to leave it there, but thank you, because When I discovered I had COVID today and felt, to be honest, pretty rough, I knew I couldn't do much of my normal over-animated talking, and I realized you were my main guest. I breathed a sigh of relief knowing that I could just basically tee you up and let you talk, and the viewers would be a lot more interested in what you had to say than anything my croaky voice could come out with. So I appreciate it very much indeed. Thank you.
Get well soon, Piers.
I'll try.